Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday again, as Eric said. Thank you so much for taking a part of your day to join us. This is the Blended Learning Planning Grant webinar for Math Innovation Zones and non-math blended learning pilots. We are very excited to spend the next hour of our day with you all. So a couple housekeeping items before we begin. I am assuming you can all see and hear because we've seen your chat responses, but thank you for that raised hand to confirm. Please ask questions as we go. You can pop them in the Q&A or we can continue using the chat. We will stop along the way to answer those questions, and then we will also post a Q&A following this webinar with any of the questions that were asked. We will also be posting a recording of the webinar on our website next week, so for those people who are missing it, it will be available for them as well. So let's start by introducing the team who is here with you today. I am Amanda Patterson, and I'm the Blended Learning Program Manager. I'm joined by our Operations Manager, Eric Coten, and the Director of the Innovative Instructional Models team here at TEA, Andrew Hodge. We are very excited to share information about the Blended Learning Grant Program with you. So here at TEA, we have one big mission: every child, all 5.5 million students, prepared for success in college, a career, or the military. That's a lot of students, and they are coming to us at very different levels of prior experience and different needs. All too often, the responsibility is falling squarely on the shoulder of our teachers to tailor their instruction to each individual student. As a teacher, and then more recently in my career as a school leader, differentiating to meet the needs of all students was a persistent challenge that we faced. In a single first grade classroom last year, we had students who could not yet consistently and accurately count to 5, and then we had other students who were starting basic multiplication, and of course, every level in between. The first step to meeting the needs of all of these first graders was to diagnose exactly where they were and what foundational math skills they may be lacking. This is especially important in math because math builds off of each other. So if you're missing one of those important blocks, you're going to keep getting more and more confused as the lessons go on and on. For our students who were not yet accurately counting, the first grade unit that was on basic addition and subtraction was just not accessible to them. Giving diagnostics tend to be a heavy load for our teachers, especially in younger grades, because the most accurate data comes from interview and observation. If teachers are able to diagnose where their students are, it's then a lot of work to create different plans. The planning load on a teacher is already so high, and adding and differentiating for individual students across classes, subjects, depending on how many students a teacher sees, is just such a commitment and a high level of skill. So let's say our teachers are able to create differentiated plans. They are planning geniuses and plan out all of these different pathways. Then they have to execute in real time and manage their classroom and try to figure out what students are understanding, what they're not, and fill in the gaps as they go. As we know, this is just a huge weight on our teachers. So what tends to happen in our Texas classrooms is we're seeing teaching towards the middle, creating a plan that we think will work for most of our students, and then the students who are a bit behind struggle through the lesson. The students who knew the lesson before it started are likely bored, and then maybe we're hitting those students right in the middle where this is a match for them. So we must support our teachers in meeting the needs of all of our students. Going back to the story of my first grade classroom at my school last year, I knew that we needed a better way to support our students and teachers to ensure that each student was getting the intervention or enrichment in math that they needed. So we found the solution of blended learning, which I'm really excited to talk about with you all today. Blended learning combines face-to-face instruction with online learning. With online learning, teachers are able to use an online curriculum program to diagnose, differentiate, and adjust for all students. In my school, we used a station rotation model during math time. So half the students were on the adaptive software that was able to diagnose their level, create a differentiated pathway, and then adjust to their needs in real time. So I could walk into the room and students were so excited to show me the levels they'd passed, what they were working on, and what was coming next for them. It was incredible to see a group of students all working on their own content at their own pace and that was matched to their needs. something that is nearly impossible for a teacher to be able to do on their own. While the other half, half of the class was engaging with the technology, the other half was getting face-to-face time with their teacher, because we know that that's core to education. You have to have human flexibility to make in-the-moment adjustments, and the love and emotional support from a teacher is absolutely critical in getting all of our students on the path to college, career, or military. It was even more powerful to see only half of the class working with the teacher, because it allowed for even more support, attention, and relationship building with individual students. So we talked a couple slides ago about what the software component can do, but let's dig a little deeper into an example to see exactly what this differentiation can look like. Students can take a simple diagnostic on the online curriculum program and obtain valuable data of where their students are coming in. Based on this initial diagnostic, software programs can create an individualized learning pathway for students that fills their gaps, pushes them beyond grade level content, and moves at their own pace. And it's not just about that one individual student. The power here is at scale. The teacher, again, is charged with taking all students to college, career, and military readiness, but the software component in blended learning can assist with making that plan. So it's doing this individualization for every student in the class. So here's an example of a report that would come out of a diagnostic. This comes from one of our software programs for Math Innovation Zones. And as you can see, there's one student expectation that a lot of students need a little bit more help on. The teacher can use that information to then create small groups, have some students working on individual activities or on the computer while they're working with students who they know have the same gap. Additionally, while students are engaging with the software, they allow for online dashboard monitoring from teachers. So a teacher can see in real time what their students are working on, what they need help with, and could even in the moment intervene without wasting any instructional time. Blended learning can allow us to help teachers reach all the kids all the time in a sustainable way. I'm going to pass it over to Eric to tell you a little bit more about the operational benefits, and then he'll get into the details about our grant program specifically.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, we're going to try to execute a quick screen share switch right here. All right, I will present from right here. Folks can see my screen okay? I'm going to say that we can. Okay, great. I like you guys using the raise hand feature. Okay, so Amanda told us an awesome story about kind of the academic benefits of blended learning and how we think this can help us meet the needs of every individual student where they are. I think another thing we've noticed in our couple of cohorts of this program so far is that blended learning has the potential to really help districts operationally as well. And there's a couple ways that it does that. The first is kind of around maximizing the effectiveness of individual teachers, and the second is around optimizing staffing models and thinking about master scheduling and staffing in a little bit of a different way. I will flip ahead to the next slide here. Here you can see a couple of different models of blended learning. You might see the station rotation, lab rotation, or a flipped classroom. And we kind of went through if you took each of these individual models, how would they impact the effectiveness of an individual teacher? So if we take station rotation, for example, right, we can potentially allow teachers here to free up some of their time when students are in collaborative activities, or if they're doing online instruction, to kind of focus their attention a little bit more in that face-to-face setting on the students that need it most. Similarly, if we look at a lab rotation model, we might be able to have kind of more students being served by a single teacher at once. And teachers, again, can kind of focus that practice, focus that face-to-face attention on the students that are in the most need at that particular time. If we look at it in maybe the most kind of future forward-thinking model of the flipped classroom, this really has that potential to supercharge kind of the potential of an individual teacher and making sure that every single student is receiving the highest quality initial exposure to content that they can. If I flip ahead here, if we talk about staffing models, right? Each of these models, as you can imagine, is a very different way of thinking about what classroom instruction looks like. If we talk about a station rotation model, maybe we can take teachers' assistants that used to kind of they led a station in the past. Maybe in a blended model, since that's mostly online, they can again focus their attention elsewhere, wherever the most need is in that individual school or district at a given time. In a lab rotation model, like I was saying before, we could potentially serve more students at one time with the teachers that we have, so we can kind of generate some efficiency there. And then in a flipped classroom model, again, that lead teacher perhaps is giving that high quality initial exposure to content to a large number of students, and a junior or assistant teacher is kind of focusing on practice. So we think that these like bigger picture operational changes that are very innovative, very forward thinking, can kind of add to the academic benefits that ultimately drive the gains that we want to see for students. We'd also be definitely remiss to not talk about blended learning in the current environment of COVID-19 that all of y'all are dealing with right now. And I think it's a great time to just give a big shout out, a big thank you from TEA for all of the incredible work that you guys are doing through this completely unprecedented, challenging time. It's inspiring, it's impressive. I've only been at TEA for about 9 months, and it has, I would never wish this upon anybody. But it's been incredibly inspiring and has excited me personally about working in education. So thank you guys for that. The way that we think blended learning can help you guys during this time, right? COVID slide, it's a real thing. We know students are coming back to school with vast deficiencies in information retention as compared to a regular summer, right? And so that need to meet students where they are, give them their individualized pathway to kind of get back to the place that they need to be is more important than ever. So blended learning is a great solution for that. The other thing we know is that this is a time for us to rethink how instruction is delivered for the long term, right? We know that folks are probably joining this webinar right now thinking about, okay, how can this help me with my COVID challenges? We don't want you guys to think that this is going to be a Band-Aid for COVID, right? This is not going to solve every problem that you guys have in the near term. This is we'll talk about the details of the program, but it's a 4-year process. This coming year for the districts that are accepted will be a planning year. But we know that, instruction is going to change, particularly when it comes to the use of technology. For long after COVID is gone, in hopefully not too long. So we want districts to be a part of this program, to think about, all right, COVID has exposed certain things that we know, certain things that we don't know, and we want to use this program, this blended learning program, to rethink our instructional model broadly for the future, to benefit our students for many, many years to come. So that type of innovation mindset, when we look for districts and we read applications, that's exactly what we're looking for. Excuse me. I do want to I want to just take a pause. I see we do have a couple of questions coming in. We have a couple built-in pauses throughout this webinar to answer questions, so we will cover those then. Okay, so getting into some of the real kind of brass tacks, the real details of this blended learning grant program, the application process, the things we look for, et cetera. I'm going to try to go slow through this. I would imagine there'll be a lot of questions, and it is a complex program, but again, we'll take our time and answer all questions in due course. So the first thing to know is that the Blended Learning Grant Program, BLGP, it's actually a kind of umbrella term that describes two separate programs that kind of follow a similar process. The first is Math Innovation Zones. The Blended Learning Grant Program was actually born as Math Innovation Zones from a bill funded by the Texas legislature a couple of years ago. And that is, if you're applying for Math Innovation Zones, you will be focusing your blended learning implementation on math. The other option we have available is our non-math blended learning pilots. This is if you wanted to focus your blended learning kind of implementation on a different subject. We've seen most folks do it for ELAR. We've got a couple for science as well. If you have something in mind for social studies, we're open to that. So you kind of have these two subject level pathways that you have if you want to apply for the program. As we kind of look at the district breakdown across these two pathways, we kind of estimate that we'll have about 2/3 of grant funds and 2/3 of districts be math innovation zones districts. We'll have 1/3 of districts be non-math pilots. And as we go through these subsequent slides, we'll talk about some of the kind of detailed differences between the Math Innovation Zones program and the non-math pilot program. The second thing to be aware of is that we have two different application pathways available for this program. The first is the grant-funded pathway, and the second is the self-funded pathway. The self-funded pathway only being available for Math Innovation Zones. So it's not available for the non-math blended learning pilots. Some of the differences between this program, I've kind of outlined in this table here. The grant-funded pathway, as the name indicates, those folks are eligible for the planning grant, which is what this webinar is focused on. That planning grant is roughly $125,000. The self-funded folks are not eligible for the planning grant, but kind of all of the fidelity of planning requirements and process would be the same. We'll talk a little bit about design and implementation vendors. Design and implementation vendors are technical assistance providers that we pair districts up with during the planning phase. If you receive a planning grant, and if you want to go down that grant-funded pathway, you will be required to contract with a design and implementation vendor during the planning phase, which is a year long. And obviously, most of your planning grant funds will go toward that, a good chunk of them at least. If you go down the self-funded pathway, you have a little bit more freedom. You do not have that requirement to contract with a design and implementation vendor during the planning phase. However, as we go into kind of the successive years after that planning year, the eligibility for the execution grant of roughly $100,000, our sustainability grant, and the Math Innovation Zones designation, that is available to both grant-funded and self-funded pathway districts. So the biggest kind of difference, again, being if you go down that self-funded pathway, you're not going to receive your planning grant money. You don't have that requirement to contract with a vendor, but you still are eligible for the kind of grants that go into the execution phase if you meet our fidelity of planning requirements. Another difference is kind of the application process itself. The grant-funded pathway, all of the details that we are talking about in this webinar are really focused on the grant-funded pathway. This is where you have to kind of answer several questions, provide attachments, and you have a couple, a little bit less than a month now left to do that, to get your application together by September 18th. If you're interested in the self-funded pathway, because you're not, again, going to be receiving a planning grant in this year, you actually just have to submit a short notice of interest to us. That can be a very quick email to this email address listed here by October 15th, and we will reply back to you indicating kind of what the next steps are in terms of that self-funded pathway. All told, if I'm thinking about these two different pathways, if you are a district that kind of feels like you have the capacity in-house to go through the planning phase on your own without the support of a design and implementation vendor, I think then the self-funded pathway could be really attractive to you. If you feel like you really do need that support, the grant-funded pathway, I think, would be the way to go. I suppose if you also were, obviously we're all incredibly slammed right now with COVID and getting back to school, but that extra month in the application process relative to the self-funded pathway could also be potentially helpful. Okay, I will step ahead. So what does the program actually look like in itself? So what we have in the application, you guys will see, is we have districts propose a feeder pattern to kind of scale blended learning across a subset of schools within the district within 4 years. So if we look at year 0, that is, again, as I mentioned, purely a planning year. You'll work with that design and implementation vendor to kind of structure a roadmap, a lengthy document, a really detailed document to chart out what is blended learning really going to look like in your district. As we go into the execution phase, right, there are 3 years of that. And we basically ask districts to, again, propose that feeder pattern of about 3 grades per year on a subset of campuses within the district. So as an example, we could have a district choose in year 1 to go with kindergarten, 3rd grade, and 6th grade. In their second year of execution, they would add to that 1st grade, 4th grade, and 7th grade, and so on into year 3, so that kind of by the end of this program, you'll have not only a great plan for what blended learning looks like at any school within your district, but you'll have actually piloted it and executed it at a full school level on a subset of campuses. If we look at some of the requirements, as I mentioned, that planning year is your year zero. So that would be when districts do apply in the next month or two, right? This next academic year will be your planning year. Some of the requirements that we talk about during planning, the first is to participate in the Blended Learning Grant Program Kickoff Summit. That will be held in the middle of November. We'll give you the exact dates a little bit later. So that is we'll be doing it virtually this year. That's the first time we're doing it virtually, but it will be a way to kind of build community and build a cohort experience of the districts who are participating in the program this year. So that is a really signature event that all new districts do have to participate in. The second is to engage with that design and implementation vendor, which I described before. Again, that is a requirement only for districts who go down that grant-funded pathway. And that design and implementation vendor will really support you in your development of the BLGP, Blended Learning Grant Program Strategic Plan, which, as I mentioned, is this lengthy document. And we had some districts this past year, I mean, it got up to 30, 40 pages of really, really detailed thought and thinking and operational kind of innovation to make sure that we have a roadmap for what blended learning is going to look like when we go into execution. A key component of that strategic plan is the selection of an approved online curriculum vendor, which usually happens in about the spring. That is, we've talked about the role of technology in blended learning, and we'll go into, in a couple of slides, the online curriculum vendors that districts have to choose from. The last part of the planning year is this reflection and revision process. This actually continues throughout every year of execution in the program, but we always want to make sure that we are continuously improving this program and the kind of implementation of high fidelity blended learning. So after each academic year, we will send out a survey from TEA, and it'll kind of prompt you to look back at the year that just happened and say, all right, what were we planning for? What actually happened? What did we learn? And how can we improve moving forward? And if we keep that spirit alive, we really think that we will be able to kind of anticipate challenges and continuously improve our blended learning program throughout the 4 years of execution. I do see I think we just have to, we forgot to record the webinar. I thought that was on automatically, but it looks like we're recording now. Sorry about that. We will post, I've seen some questions, we will post the slides and the recording to the extent that we capture the recording on our website afterwards, and we'll have all of your emails so we can disseminate that to you guys as well. Picking back up into what the execution phase looks like. So there's a lot on this slide. I'm going to spend a good bit of time on it. We talked about the planning requirements. The first thing to notice here is these big bubbles that say achieve provisional or achieve designated math innovation zones status. So the math innovation zone status, this is a legislative kind of a component of legislation that's built into the math innovation zone statute. And what it basically says is that if you are participating in math innovation zones and you complete our fidelity of planning and our fidelity of execution requirements throughout the program, you achieve what's called designated math innovation zone status. That status, as you see at the bottom here, it actually carries a 2-year pause on any TEA commissioner interventions for any of the designated campuses that earn that math innovation zones designation. So that is a really nice benefit of the program available for math innovation zones only. So that is actually not built into the non-math pilots legislation, and so that status is only available for districts who are participating in math innovation zones. As we talk about like what those execution requirements are to earn that status, right? You can see a few of them listed here. We asked for districts to administer an approved interim assessment 3 times per year. This is a way of helping us understand are students progressing in the way that we want them to throughout the year. We ask that schools provide kind of dedicated time to teachers for both data-driven planning and for meaningful learning experiences to make sure that, again, we're making the most of all of the data that is coming out of a blended learning program. We mentioned approved online curriculum vendors before, right? That is a bedrock piece of this program. Districts will select that online curriculum vendor, and we will kind of consistently throughout the year be looking at our students actually using this online curriculum program with fidelity. And we'll go into a couple of slides about what those fidelity metrics might look like. And then once the program kind of wraps up after year 3, we'll kind of do an outcomes report and analysis of, all right, did we see the software being used to the extent that we wanted to? Did we see the academic gains available, generated that we were kind of aiming for? All of these requirements, I think the spirit of this, right? You often see a lot of requirements coming from TEA, right? You know, these are we're not trying to be a compliance officer here, right? We are trying to support you guys. We are trying to kind of put in practices that we know can generate the academic gains for students that come from blended learning. So would think of those kind of requirements as more supportive rather than kind of being compliance focused. A couple folks asking about kind of design and implementation or kind of approved online curriculum vendors. So we have a little bit of a different set from between Math Innovation Zones and between the non-math blended learning pilots. In Math Innovation Zones, these are our 8 approved software vendors, and the metrics that you see beneath all of them are what their fidelity of execution metrics are. So you can see that some vendors, they aim for a fidelity of execution metric that is focused in time, some focus on lessons, some focus on questions. It kind of depends on the program. But these are the vendors that we approve through a very kind of robust application process, and that we believe have a real lot to offer to students in terms of improving their math attainment. You can choose multiple different, you have to choose at least one of these if you're in Math Innovation Zones. You can choose multiple different software vendors for different different grades throughout the program. So if you had kindergarten, 3rd grade, and 6th grade in year 1, you could potentially have kindergarten using Imagine Math and the other 2 grades using ST Math. The only thing we ask is that the individual online curriculum vendor is consistent at the grade level. So you can't have multiple different 6th grade classrooms using different vendors. On the non-math side, it's a little bit different. We do not have a kind of refined list of approved online curriculum vendors, but we do ask districts interested in the non-math pathway to propose to us the online curriculum vendor that they have in mind. And we ask for kind of a documentation of the academic impact that online curriculum vendor has been able to drive. So you'll actually submit that through the application process, and we will approve it kind of on a case-by-case basis. Another thing I wanted to, kind of a little bit of an adjustment or an addition that we're making to the program this year. One of the things we've seen is that the challenge that districts have kind of experienced in sustaining high quality blended learning long term. And so what we're doing this year is we're actually kind of focusing on a new component of the program known as sustainability planning to really make sure that blended learning is, again, sustained long term as like a fundamental component of instruction within the district. So you'll see that's broken up into 2 categories. The first is financial planning, and the second is a reimagining of master scheduling. We will actually also be adding an additional grant to districts who are selected and who meet fidelity of planning and fidelity of execution requirements to cover some technical assistance in each of these 2 categories. What that might look like throughout the program, in year 0, districts who meet their fidelity of planning requirements will apply for and receive a sustainability grant. That'll be a separate grant application. We don't have to worry about that right now. And you'll have kind of an introduction to these technical assistance providers that are going to provide this support. And then throughout execution, we'll kind of have several touch points throughout the year led by those technical assistance vendors to make sure that whether it's on the financial side, the master scheduling side, or both, that we are kind of planning for blended learning being sustained long term, far beyond the kind of expiration of the grant and the 4-year cycle, the 4-year life of the program. So districts who are selected will get more details about the sustainability planning and grants timeline kind of as we move through the program. Just wanted to introduce that additional component this year. All right, let's take a pause for questions. Andrew, Amanda, feel free to come off mute if you think that there are questions we need to answer, things we need to reconfirm. I'm just going to flip through the chat here while we're at it. Another thing is that any questions that don't get answered, we'll be kind of recording these in a document and posting that to our website and to the grant page afterwards as well. So all of that will be posted publicly.
We've had a question about the different types of grants. So there's the planning grant that this application is for, which is for that year zero planning grant. And then there's one execution grant that districts who meet the planning requirements are eligible for going into year one. And then Eric just referenced a sustainability grant that is also, that schools also become, or districts also become eligible once they're in the program to help with that master scheduling and financial long-term planning. So there's actually 3 different grants, and this is for the first one in that sequence that's based around planning for your blended model.
Yep, and we will go through some of the more details on those the details on those grants moving forward. I think the reason we have it broken down in that way, right? We want to see different kind of checkpoints within the life of the program, right? We want to see, okay, we give you a planning grant. We want to see, can you make it through that fidelity of planning stage sufficiently, right? Are you ready for that? Have you put in the thought? And kind of, you know, thereby the execution grant, the sustainability grants, they become something that you kind of earn by going through a really robust planning process. All right, so since we do have some grant-related questions, let's move forward. We're going to get into some of the details of that right here. So as Amanda just mentioned, fall 2020, with the term we're in right now, this is when we're talking about the planning grant, right? So we will be awarding up to 30 planning grants of up to $125,000. We'll decide the precise amounts based on the number of applications we receive and the quality of those applications. Again, we'll award about 2/3 of districts for math innovation zones, 1/3 of districts for non-math blended learning pilots. We'll also award, kind of welcome into the program up to 20 self-funded districts. And again, those districts will remain eligible for the execution and sustainability grants. So if you look over here and we talk about, you know, next summer, we're looking at up to 50 districts who may receive execution grants. So that is obviously our hope. If we have 30 planning grants, if we have 20 self-funded districts, our hope is that they all meet their fidelity of planning requirements with the support that we're able to provide. And then all of them would be eligible for those execution grants of up to $100,000. And the way we kind of judge the awarding of those execution grants is based on the quality of that strategic plan that you submit at the end of your planning year. Sustainability grants, in terms of the amount, we'll still clarify. We're clarifying the exact amount based on interest. But again, once you're welcomed into the program, we will give more details on that as the program goes on. You'll also see the application deadline. We'll go through that in a little bit, but that is September 18th. If we talk about the uses of funds for each of these grants, so the planning grants, we talked about the amount, we talked about the number. Few key kind of buckets of costs that are kind of big focuses of this grant. The first is personnel, so we'll talk about it in a minute, but the Blended Learning Grant Program Project Manager, PM, is a really key person who leads this work at the district level. So the salaries, or kind of covering the costs, the general costs of that person, is an allowable use of funds. We estimate that that's probably going to be about 40%, but there is flexibility based on district need. Technical assistance, we talked about the design and implementation vendor who districts that apply for that grant-funded pathway will engage with. The cost of technical assistance from that vendor is another allowable use of funds, and we estimate that that's about 40% as well. And then we leave another 20% for other necessary costs that are kind of planning related. We get a lot of questions about if we can use planning grants to purchase hardware, purchase networking, infrastructure, things like that. The answer is usually no. Anything that is from the planning grant should be planning related. So if you have a planning related cost, that is what the planning grant is designed to be used for. In contrast, if we look at it at the execution grants, if you want to purchase computers, if you want to purchase network infrastructure, software, additional technical assistance, anything that is related to the implementation of blended learning at your district, that is what the execution grant is designed to cover. Both of these grants, you'll obviously apply for them. The planning grant, for example, you'll apply for this fall. The grant funds actually don't expire until the end of 2023. So you'll have multiple years in which to use those grant funds. And you can kind of continue to use the grant funds and draw down that grant for any planning related cost throughout the life of the program. Similar principle for execution. It is a one-time grant, but you can actually spend it down during a couple of years. I remember we had a question before about our approved design and implementation vendors and who those are. If you guys wanted to look them up, we'll have 3 this year. We will have Education Elements, we'll have Transcend Education, and we will have Engage to Learn. Okay, a couple other program requirements. We talked about that blended learning grant program project manager at the district level. So one of the requirements of applying is that you guys designate a single person to allocate at least 50% of their time for the life of the project to this work, right? We know how important the project manager is. It is incredibly important to have a consistent and go-to person whose job it really is to make sure that this high fidelity blended learning is happening and that this innovation is kind of sustaining itself both on the campuses and kind of district-wide. So we do ask for that very dedicated project manager. We'll go through the rubric in a minute about what kind of we look for in project managers in terms of evaluating if they're good candidates. Another thing we require is a feeder pattern approach. We talked about that a few slides ago. You have to kind of pick that subset of campuses within the district and that subset of grades within each campus that you're going to kind of roll out blended learning within successively throughout the 3 years of the program. And the last kind of formal requirement we have is that high quality online software curriculum. We went through those kind of available vendors for both math innovation zones and for non-math pilots before, but we do ask that you guys kind of select one of those software vendors during the spring of your planning year and kind of have consistently using an approved vendor throughout the life of the program. You can switch software vendors annually. So if, for example, you're using ST Math in year 1 and you decide you want to switch to Zern in year 2, that is something that you're allowed to do. I just kind of have to get give us a heads up and we'll kind of walk through that and approve that for you. All right, I'm going to spend a good bit of time. You guys will see we actually copy and pasted this from the application itself, but it's always great, I think, when you're kind of applying for something and looking to get approved to know what exactly are we looking for and what are the weights of those individual categories. So this is our scoring rubric. We're sharing the whole thing with you right here. And we want to kind of go through what is most important when we're evaluating applications. The first thing you'll see it is half the application score is commitment from leadership. So we talked about wanting districts here who are interested in innovation, who are committed to this work, whose blended learning plan is kind of consistent with the both near-term priorities and long-term vision of the district overall. So illustrating that district commitment from leadership all the way up and down is incredibly important and probably the single most vital characteristic that we've seen in districts who do this work successfully. The way you kind of will illustrate that, we ask for a couple of different attachments to the application. In addition to questions that you guys will answer. Those attachments might be letters of support from superintendents, from other kind of chief academic officers, other kind of senior folks at the district level, to show that they're willing to embrace the way that we are kind of leading this work, and that they're eager to kind of reimagine the way that instruction is delivered on their campuses for their students. Another thing we do look at here, a quick note, is if you are participating in another kind of innovative program from TEA, this could be Texas Home Learning 3.0, additional days school year. We have a variety of other programs. Definitely indicate that in your application, and that is kind of a positive indicator that we look at from districts. The next thing we've been talking about here is that project manager. So that is 25% of the overall score. We really do, again, want to look for that single person who is both qualified to lead this work based on their kind of past experience and past work within the district, but who also has who's also kind of situated within the district organization in a place that they're able to catalyze that really broader, bigger picture change, rather than kind of just looking after sort of a smaller add-on program, right? We want that person to really love blended learning, to kind of make it a focal point of their day-to-day in the past, the present, and the future, and that person can kind of influence other folks within the district at the school level, at the senior district level, to make sure that this is a program that is kind of sustaining operational and academic change district-wide, rather than just being a program that, again, is just an add-on at a couple of different campuses. So we really do look for the qualifications and the influence capability of that project manager. The other two things we look at here, slightly smaller but still extremely important, are economic indicators. So we do prioritize local education agencies that have the highest enrollment of educationally disadvantaged students. We know that blended learning, again, has a ton to create gains for students of all ability levels, but particularly for those students who are disadvantaged. We do want to close that close that gap in attainment. We also look for feeder patterns in schools that kind of have the majority of students approaching grade level, with at least 15% meeting grade level in the proposed subject, whether it be math or whatever subject you're proposing for non-math. So those are kind of smaller indicators that we still do look for in evaluating districts.
Hey, Eric, while we're on this side, there's a few questions around this that I definitely want to clarify. So I think to sum up what a target district is the top two things are clearly the most important on the rubric. The commitment from leadership. There's been a few questions about what about the grants? When do these grants happen? When are we going to run out of grant funding? I want to be clear here that the perfect fit for math innovation zones or non-math blended pilot is a district that's already headed in this direction. There's a district that says, "What we are blended." Pre-COVID, COVID, whatever the time frame for selecting, saying that we want to go blended, that's beside the point. But what we're looking to do with math innovation zones and non-math blended pilots is to find those districts and say, "Hey, you're going this way. We want to help you. We have a helpful framework. We have a helpful network. We have we have resources. We have other incentives that can help you scale and sustain this program. And we want to jump in." So as much in this application process as you can convey that your district and senior leadership within the district, whether it's superintendent, school board, chief academic officers, are committed to this work, those are the folks that are going to get the most points, as noted in this rubric. With regard to project manager, we got a few questions about, can we hire a project manager? Can this be part-time person? The answer is it depends. So really ground your answer in this rubric. So what we've seen to be effective from districts is to have somebody that is enabled to do the work. And a lot of times when somebody's a part-time employee, they may not be the person that is best positioned to move in between Office of Innovation, Office of Curriculum Instruction, Instructional Technology, or working with the superintendent, then working with the schools and the principals at the schools. But that's not 100% of the time. There's been folks in math innovation zones that have said, "Look, this is why this approach makes sense," and they've conveyed that within their application. And those are folks that get a lot of points. So the project manager will be required to spend 50% or so of a full-time employee's time on this project. That is not a grant. That is not a grant mandated requirement. That is a program requirement. That is saying this is a lot of work, and this is going to take half of a full-time employee's time over the life of the project. Good comments in the chat as well. Superintendent Steele from Cisco noted, this person needs to have some supervisory authority over teachers. In any way that you can convey that this person, the blended learning project managers, is able, has the capability and is willing to see this program through with schools and through the district, those are going to be the folks that get the full amount of this 25%.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Okay, let's move forward here. I want to make sure we get to the details of the kind of timeline and the application itself. If we look at the timeline for what this might look like for folks who are applying for this grant this year, the letter of interest deadline for that grant funded pathway is September 18th. We expect to award, notify districts of who is kind of receiving those planning grants on October 13th. A couple of days before then, we may reach out to folks to kind of conduct phone interviews and other kind of information gathering exercises. The exact dates of that Blended Learning Grant Program Kickoff Summit virtually will be November 12th and November 13th. And then right after that, we kind of launch districts into that planning process. So you will kind of contract with that design and implementation vendor sometime in December, if you're, of course, on the grant-funded pathway rather than the self-funded pathway. And planning will kind of take you through the remainder of the academic year, all the way up until May, June, July, when we will award execution grants to districts who have met that fidelity of planning requirement and submitted that strategic plan that meets our standards. Some other kind of intermediate milestones in that, software selection is usually in the spring of 2021. Again, that's a really, really key component of the strategic planning process. And another component I think it would be helpful to mention is when we're talking about judging fidelity of planning, our evaluator for this program is the Blended and Personalized Learning Department at Texas Tech University. They're another awesome support who knows a ton about blended learning, who knows a ton about doing it right, who is able to support you guys with office hours and other kind of supportive resources to help you complete a very robust planning process. So that's kind of what that planning year looks like. And if we think about going into execution, it's kind of these checkpoints on fidelity of execution throughout your execution years as you go into 2021, 22, and 2023. I think we just answered a good bit of questions, so I want to keep going. I want to try to do this. We're actually going to flip out of the presentation and show you guys how to actually find this grant opportunity. I know it's not always the easiest thing to navigate the TEA grant opportunity site. So what I'm going to do is I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm going to flip over on my own to this grant opportunities page, and now I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so hopefully this is working right here. So this is the TEA grant opportunities page. You can find it by just Googling TEA grant opportunities. There are two ways to kind of find the actual grant itself. You can actually go into the application name drop down. You'll see this is every grant opportunity that is available from TEA right now. There's a lot of them. You can find this one right here, 2020-2023 Blended Learning Grant Program Planning Grants. I actually think it's hard to find that. So what I do is I go to school year, I click 2021, this school year, that filters it down, and then I just search the page for blended, and there we go, it's right there. So if I click this plus right here, it's going to take me to the actual grant application page. You see there's some kind of program information, where is it funded from, how many grants are we allowing, etc. And all of these links right here, these are what you want to go through to kind of learn about the program and make sure that you're kind of submitting all of the right information. The first thing I would do is I would open this Blgp Overview, as it says, read first in capital letters. I would definitely do that. This is a lengthy document. A lot of the stuff we cover in this webinar is listed within this document, but it's really great. It gives a complete overview of the program, all of the requirements, all of the things we ask for, all of the details. It has some great kind of exhibits at the back. We go all the way down here to kind of help you learn about the program and make sure that you and all of your staff are kind of familiar with what we're looking for. Another important appendix item I want to highlight here. Look, we recognize completely how busy you guys are right now. So we actually put timing estimates for how long it should take you to complete this letter of interest process. So depending on the individual steps that it will take to complete the process, we kind of put a couple of hours, a range of hours that we think it should take you. And please try to hold yourself to that. We want you to focus on getting back to school smoothly, staying safe, staying healthy. And so sort of time box yourself when you're completing this LOI. I'll flip back to this grant page, and I will go to the application checklist. If you want to figure out, all right, what the heck do I have to submit for this grant? What are all the different things that I have to send to TEA? This is a unified checklist that actually shows you every single thing that you have to submit. So The letter of interest, we'll go through all of these, but the letter of interest application form, the grant budget, if you're applying for the grant funded pathway, the district information form, there's either one of those, 1A for MIZ or 1B for non-math, a variety of letters of support, which we were talking about from school leadership, from the project manager. We asked for the project manager's resume. We asked for an organizational chart, all of those things. And so if you check every single one of those boxes and email it to this address, you will have completed the application sufficiently. We have the program guidelines. Feel free to read that one. This is some of the more statutory, kind of legal language around the grant. Feel free to have your grants department look through that if they need to, a little bit more detailed. Application part 1. This is kind of, I talked about there's some basic district information in here, but this is where we kind of prompt you guys with those key questions that we'd like answered. So you'll see the first question here is about district commitment. Explain why your district wants to join. We recommend about a page and a half or 2 pages to answer A, B, and C here. So you have space to actually be able to do that. If we go down to question 2, that's all about the project manager, right? Who is this person? What are their qualifications? What is their background? And why are they the right project manager for this role? We have a quick question. Question 3 is about how does the district use data to drive decision-making throughout the district. We know that data-driven instruction and being data-focused overall is an incredibly important part of this program. And then we have a special question just for non-math pilot applicants to articulate the online curriculum program that they intend to use. Since, as we mentioned, the non-math folks, they don't have a restricted list of online curriculum vendors to be able to choose from. Application part 2, you'll see, I won't open this one. This is, it downloads an Excel file. That's just the formal budget application that shows kind of how you project you'll be using the funds. If you're not familiar with filling out grant applications and you have any questions on that, you can always email our email address, miz@tea.texas.gov. It's listed in a few different places, and we can help you, link you up with our grants team to be able to help you fill that out. Attachment 1A, attachment 1B, I'm not going to open those as well. They're also Excel files. You only have to fill out one of those, depends on if you're applying to math innovation zones or to the non-math pilots. But that's basically just some basic district information about number of students, the campuses that are going to be involved, the feeder pattern, all sorts of that, the STAR scores on the past couple of years. Obviously, we didn't have STAR this year, but that helps us get a sense of those academic results that a district has had thus far. And so that is the kind of final component of this application process. So this is where kind of everything lives. Again, I would really anchor yourself in that overview document to kind of continue to just refer back to that when you're thinking about what are we looking for? Do I need to see any particular information about what this program is all about? That's kind of your go-to, and all of the other materials are kind of to help you actually submit things to us as TEA. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Just a moment. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to kind of wrap us up.
All right, thanks, Eric. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So a couple great questions that came in that others may be wondering about. The first is the letter of intent versus the letter of interest. Very confusing, we're realizing. On Monday, you can submit an optional letter of intent to apply. All that means is emailing miz@tea.texas.gov, a sentence telling us we plan to apply. It just helps us prepare for our application volume. The letter of interest, the application Eric just walked through, that is due on September 18th. Districts who do not send us an email telling us they intend to apply can still submit that letter of interest. It's an optional step that's due on Monday that should take 2 seconds. You can do it as we speak right now, just emailing us at Miz, telling us to expect your application. So the timeline is straight from the document Eric just showed you. September 18th is our big deadline for your letter of interest. Then we will immediately begin reviewing. If needed, we'll conduct some phone interviews October 2nd through the 7th, and then we plan to announce awards on October 13th. And our virtual kickoff summit will be November 12th and 13th. We will post this recording along with answers to all of these great questions that we've been receiving to our Ms. webpage next week. And then a few pro tips. First is use that application checklist Eric showed as a complete guide for what you need to submit. Thoroughly review all the attachments to make sure that you get everything. We're going to show you some of our current Ms. districts and blended learning non-math pilots. So if you know people or if you want us to connect you with a similar district so you can talk to them about their experience in the program, we are happy to answer questions, but sometimes it's great to hear from people who are living it and what their experience has been. And then lastly, make sure to reference those timing recommendations that Eric showed. We know that everybody in education right now has a ton on their plates, and so we don't want this application to be something that takes you days and days. We want it to be a reasonable amount of time where you can tell us enough about your district and your context, but not take away from really important work that you all are doing with kids right now.
Amanda, before you take us home, one thing to just quickly call out. Last year in our process, we actually had 4 or 5 district applications that were rejected because they did not email them to loi.applications@tea.texas.gov, or they emailed them after that date. These are going to be big files, so it's going to take a little bit of time. These go to our grants team, and if our grants team sees that the time stamp when the email was sent was past 11:59 p.m. on September 18th, they will reject the application. So I want to highlight that for the folks that are on this call. This date is critical. This is not something that has gray area. This is black and white. Either you get it in or you don't, and if you don't, there's a ton of work that we would hate to see go to waste, so just make sure that you're padding in some extra time with that.
I also wanted to just highlight one other quick thing. We've mentioned it a couple times, but that grant-funded application due date is September 18th. Remember that we still do have that self-funded application pathway, which basically does not require you to complete the grant application. So if you do want to go down that self-funded pathway, if you want to kind of forego the planning grant, forego the design and implementation vendor requirement and go through the planning on your own, we will still absolutely support you. You just have to send us a quick email by October 15th saying that we intend to apply for the self-funded pathway, and we will follow up with kind of the application requirements for that pathway. And again, you will remain eligible for all of the execution and sustainability grants if you do meet the fidelity of planning requirements. I'm going to flip to the next slide.
That is our map. So if you want to reach out to anyone to talk to them about it, or if you'd like us to help facilitate that. One other great question that has been coming in is about applying for Ms. versus non-math pilots. If you are a current Ms. district, you are eligible to apply for a non-math pilot and start this work in another subject, which is really exciting. If you are not a current district, you can apply for either Ms. or non-math, or you could choose to apply for both. If you do apply for both and were awarded both, we would ask you to pick which one you would want to participate in this first year. Also, if you're applying for both, you would need 2 separate application sets for both Ms. and non-math.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there. So this is, as Amanda mentioned, this is a map of all the districts participating in the program thus far. As you've seen, this will be our 4th cohort. We've had 3 different cohorts that we welcomed in successive years. If you know folks in these districts, please reach out to them to learn about their experience. If you don't know anybody and you want to be put in touch with a particular district, shoot us a note to miz@tea.texas.gov, and we're happy to connect you. I think that is all. So we are right at just flipped to 1 o'clock. Yeah, thank you guys for joining, for spending an hour with us today. Again, incredible to see the work that you're doing during this unprecedented school year. It's inspiring to all of us at TEA, and we hope that this program can support you. I think we will stay on for a couple of minutes to answer any additional questions that may come through in the chat. You can always email us at miz@tea.texas.gov anytime, and we look forward to seeing your applications and are excited to welcome a few districts to the program this year.
Eric, can we go back to the last slide with the map?
Yep.
Great. If you were not able to keep up with all of those rapid questions happening in the chat and the Q&A, we will release that FAQ document along with this recording next week. So you'll have access to all of these questions and answers, and any more that should happen to be directly emailed to us. We'll make sure that those are available for everyone as well.